Well, Grant, thank you for agreeing to be my first interview that I get to do on this journey to kind of reimagine or redirect where God is calling me at this season. And part of what I've worked with Andy on is identifying what's most important in my heart that I feel God is calling me to do, and what are the key values. And one of the key values is something you and I share, which is that cooperation between the generations. And of course, we're both passionate about the church and the mission of God, but this idea of working together. And so I loved your book. I felt like, man, I sat down, my husband loved your book because it had all these great pictures, but also what you had to say, because he's a mentor to a lot of young people. And I think you encouraged him to have a better understanding how to engage with, support, and lift up the next generation, equip the next generation. So thank you for all you do. And thank you for being here and for this topic that I chose from your book, from page 57 of your book, where you said our plans and God's plans don't always line up. But maturity happens when we trust his ways more than our ways. And being with all that's gone on with COVID, with the changes that everyone's gone through, I thought, wow, what a great topic to talk about from our different perspectives, right? We come from different generations and we might see this experience different. And and I sent you a bunch of thoughts as far as, ways to engage in this, but tell us a little bit about you. I'm so excited to introduce you to the people that I hang out with, my friends, my community, my followers. A lot of them don't know you, have never heard of you. Many of them have. So I don't want to assume anything. So maybe you can start by telling us about you, and then we can get into the topic.
Yeah. So from Dallas, Texas. I've been here most of my life. And it's really ironic because I kind of like a millennial and whisper. And so I help translate to parents that are trying to raise the next generation, pastors that are trying to reach the next generation, or business leaders that are trying to retain the next generation, just how to connect with them. It's always interesting telling young people when they ask me, what do I do? And I'm like, I actually talk about you, like to older people that are trying to figure you out. It's just, and they always ask, how did you get into that job? And I'm like, it's really crazy. I never like strategize. How do you become a voice on the next generation to older generations? However, the second thing I do is also, I just have a huge heart for how can I unify the church, especially among the next generation. And I love diversity. I love seeing what happens when diversity comes together. I think we all kind of heard that we're better together, but I've just gotten to see what it's like when when I say diversity, I don't just mean racial diversity. I mean generational diversity. I mean denominational diversity. And I especially have a huge heart too these days for like occupational diversity. I think so often the enemy tries to divide us because he can't defeat us. Like the Lord said, Jesus said, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. And so I've always felt like if I was the enemy, I would try to, if I can't defeat the church, then I can try to divide the church. And I think he's done a really good job of making the Black church or the white church or the Episcopal church and the charismatic church, and even the division between sacred and secular, where pastors and nonprofit leaders or Christian authors, we feel like we're doing maybe the real ministry, and those in the marketplace and those that are in Hollywood, they feel like they're doing, they have to find other routes and outlets for their faith. But I think that sacred and secular divide actually really hurts the mission of God. And so what I practically do for that is I try to throw very incredible memory making experiences through retreats for 3 to 4 days. And we just recruit some of the most diverse, dynamic young leaders from across the country that are representing Christ in their culture. And so these could be a ton of professional athletes that follow God. It could be actors and actresses, nonprofit leaders, authors, musicians, speakers, some pastors, but anyone who's in their 20s and 30s and has an unbelievably unique platform for their age. I want them to have a community with others that don't look like them, but serve the same Lord.
So good. Now, Grant, I was trying to remember how we met, and this is what I remember, and tell me if I'm right. You were coming to Catalyst, and you tweeted about needing a ride, and I was following the Twitter sphere on Catalyst, and I said, I'll give you a ride, and, which was like such an impulsive thing for me to do afterwards. I thought, what was I thinking? But I gave you and someone else a ride, right? To Mariners Church.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think we actually ever met at Axiom, but
No.
I mean, you hosted us, and so in between you hosting that dinner and a couple months after that a couple months after that, I was actually reached out to by Catalyst, at the time, Tyler Regan, who was the president, and he kind of said, hey, someone said I need to talk to you and connect. And even that was a God story, because I said, dude, it's crazy, but he lives in Atlanta. I said, I'm going to Atlanta in the next 2 days. And so if you're free, I'd love to connect. And I've known of Catalyst for 10 plus years. Like, it was one of the most influential conferences for my life. And so we meet up, and probably 2 weeks later said, hey, God really put you on my heart. I'm forming kind of a board for Catalyst, and would you consider being on it? You'll be the youngest person on the board. And so with that came going to Catalyst West, which I'd never been at. And when they said it was at Mariners, I looked at it and I was like, hey, I kind of know of someone who lives close to there. And so I don't know. I was like, should I even reach out and ask? But I was like, I know you go to that church, worked at the church at the time. And so, yeah, I remember reaching out and saying, hey, any chance I could stay? And yeah, you let us stay. You let us borrow a car. You're very generous to us.
Oh, that's so cool. And I love your heart and what you're after. And so, yeah, thanks for joining me. And all right, so let's get to this topic, right? Sometimes God's plans don't line up with ours, which, yeah. I so feel that right now. And you were saying this resonates with you. I mean, this is something you wrote. Your book came out 2018, right?
Yeah.
And this is still something you're obviously, I think we have to be reminded often, but you're saying, wow, I'm actually thinking about that. So tell me kind of where you're at with that statement and in your current season.
Yeah. And what's unique about answering it, when you told me that topic recently, I said, hey, I feel like I'm going through that. I wish I could say I feel like I'm on the other side of that, but I'm not. Like, I'm not in a place where my plans aren't working out, but I know God's plans are. And now I see I don't know what his plans are. And it's relatable, but I've noticed a pattern of, there's so many times in life that we have like a vision or dream, and worse, I would say, is that God gives us a vision or a dream, and then he doesn't. I have a very raw relationship with God, where I sometimes think it's messed up almost, that he gives us these visions and these dreams, and then he doesn't tell us how to get there or how hard it's going to be. For example, like Joseph, as a young boy, he gives him this big vision, and he doesn't say, this is actually so hard, until you actually get to this part of the vision that I just gave you. I mean, even like David, like to anoint him at such a young age, but it's going to take years until he actually gets to be the king, like running, hiding from Saul, getting spears thrown at him, like just so much stuff. Probably the hardest that I still wrestle with to this day, that I don't know if like on this side of heaven I'll fully be able to understand, is even John the Baptist. I mean, this is a guy who he's related to, and he takes off. He's like, hey, no person born of woman is more like, in some sense, important than this guy right here. And that guy does not have the best end. I mean, even he, who's like so confident, so set apart. I mean, he's like out in the wilderness, dressed very different. He doesn't care about what people think, because he's confident in God's plan for his life. But even at the end of his life, he's in prison and asking Jesus, hey, are you the one? Are you the Messiah? Because I'm still in prison, and I didn't expect this to be the end for me. And he loses his life. Like, I think that's the hard part of following God, that we don't always talk about, but it is the reality of life. And so all that to say is, I've just seen a lot of times where it felt like such rejection while still trying to serve God. And then a while later, I saw God show up in a big way. And I could share a story or two, but I'll give you some time to comment on that.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I am so glad you don't have it worked out, because part of what I am trying to really model and live out loud is this idea that we're all on a spiritual journey, that none of us have arrived. right? And that this journey that we're on is, at least to us, is very uncharted. It's not, my journey is not the same as your journey. Our journeys are not like Joseph's journey. So it seems to us extremely uncharted. It's not to God, obviously, but that we can embrace the mystery of the journey and really embrace that we're on the journey versus, that rush to the destination. It's not something I particularly like because I'm a destination person. So I've had to learn on my journey with Lord to be on the moment and in the time that I'm in. And so I think it's perfect that you're not on the other side. And I question if you're really ever going to be on the other side, right? Any of us, for that matter. But the issue of it being hard, the journey, getting a dream and it being hard, so resonates with me, Grant. So I would love to hear some stories. I heard from God at a young age, and then I ran away from God, and then I came back to the Lord later in my 40s. So it's been really hard to trust God in this journey. So tell me some stories about how you've seen that kind of play out.
When Initiative started, the year it started, it just blew up so quickly. And a lot of people don't realize that there's never overnight success. There always is some story behind that story. And for me, a lot of people saw Initiative just blow up and kind of saw Grant as, hey, listen, I just started getting invited to speak all over, started doing all these different things. But reality is, years before I ever started my own nonprofit, I helped a best friend of mine start a nonprofit for 4 to 5 years. So when I was 19 years old, I just had entered into college, and this guy who was older than me, 10 years older, he asked me to be a board member. And it was such a wake-up call to me, man, I'm going to be the youngest on this board. I remember going to Barnes & Noble and asking the front desk person, hey, what are the most popular books on leadership? Because I just wanted to learn how to be a leader. I'm I think sometimes why young people leave the church is because they're not given big responsibilities. And me given such a big responsibility of being a board member for a new nonprofit, I just took it very seriously, and it forced me to mature and it forced me to grow. Like they said, go read The Tipping Point, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Good to Great. And so I never heard of those books. Now they're so staple books, but because at a young age, I was okay, I read it. And I remember thinking, man, these books I had never really seen myself as a reader, but I read those books, it actually felt relevant to what I was. Beowulf and Holes and other books never really connect, or Kill a Mockingbird, where they're good books, but these books really connected my everyday life right then. And so all that to say is I dedicated my soul and my life to that ministry for the next couple of years. I grew so much as a leader. I developed that ministry so much. And to the point that my leadership and my speaking and my ability to just help the church and mobilize young people was skyrocketing. My grades in college were plummeting.
Oh my gosh.
I had a 1.8 GPA. I was just such a bad student. And I really struggled this tension of, I remember talking to my parents and being they're asking, why is your grade so bad? I'm Mom, Dad, I don't learn anything in school that actually is relevant to what I'm doing in life. I'm learning so much more through this ministry, and the actual practical experience is teaching me so much more than some of these classes I'm taking. Why am I even taking this class? What is it going to actually do in my life? And so part of that was immaturity on my end. But what I ended up deciding to do in all my wisdom was I just dropped out of college. I was I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't even talk to my parents. I just went to the counselor and dropped out. And I tried to move home with my parents because I lived on campus. So once you drop out, you can't live there. So I go home, I tell my mom what I did, and she's kind of cool with me moving home. But my dad, who's from South Africa, culturally different, he's totally not okay with me moving home. As soon as he got there, he grabbed my bags in from my old room and just started throwing them in the front yard and said, you can't just show up, tell us you dropped out and think you're going to move home. You have to go find a job, find a home. You decided to make this adult decision by yourself. Now you have to go develop an adult life by yourself. And I was just really frustrated and felt kind of abandoned. I thought, man, all my friends, all these young people I know have moved home after college. How would you not let me even stay for give me at least 2 months and then I'll find a job. But just getting I felt that abandoned and rejected by my family, that they didn't support my mission. And my dad at the time wasn't really a believer much. And so he didn't even really support me giving all the time to the ministry. And the ministry, work for the ministry. And I asked them the week before, hey, can you guys really pray about me working? I'll work for like, it was like $500 a month, which at the time was a lot of money because I had $0 a month coming in. And so I go into the meeting and they say, first 3 minutes of the meeting was, hey, I know you've been praying. I was like desperate for this job. And they said, we're not going to give you that job, but we do want to talk to you about something else. They said, we want to let you go from this ministry. It's called Breakdown Ministries. And I was like, okay, I'm expecting to get a job. You're not only not giving me the job, you're letting me go. And they said, we just feel we'd have poor leadership and stewardship if we let you throw your life away, drop out of college for this ministry. We've got to look out for you. We want you to at least finish college before you continue doing this ministry. So they were looking out for me. But at my time, I'm like, you guys don't get it. And I really was kind of lost. Like, okay, I don't have ministry. I don't have college. I don't have a job. I don't have a home. And now I don't even know what's next.
By the way, I just think it's so awesome that your dad did that. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
My mom kicked me out too. It worked. It worked.
Yeah, most parents agree with the whole like kicking out. And I look back on my dad not letting me stay, and I am thankful and I am grateful now. But at that time, I felt like my dad kicking me out, and my family basically I felt like rejecting me. My school being let go there, of course, or just quitting school. And then now the final straw was like the ministry, which I felt like gave my life to, also then letting me go. And all of them trying to say they're doing it out of love. And I'm all doing this for God. I just felt like everything is not lining up. And yeah, I felt kind of lost. Like, who am I now? What do I do? I don't have a job. I don't have a home. I'm not in college. And a crazy thing happened was two things. Was one, this wedding videographer had asked me if I wanted to second shoot a wedding for him. And I really don't share this story often. And a lot of people don't know I used to shoot weddings. Right before Initiative started, between Breakdown Ministries and Initiative Network, was this guy asked me because I wanted to learn how to just be better at video and photography for the ministry for Breakdown. And it was a crazy story where this guy was like, could you come shoot a wedding in 1 week from now? And I'm actually in the wedding, and I didn't realize my friend wanted me to do the wedding. But this guy was a very sought after videographer. And he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to train you every day for the next 5 days for 3 to 4 hours, how to shoot weddings like I shoot weddings. And he said, do you have the time to do that? I know that's a big ask. I don't know what your job looks like, or I know you're doing that ministry. And I told him, I'm not, all I have is time. Like, I can come over every day and do this. And he had like drills, and within 5 days, this guy taught me not how to be as good as him, but it was ridiculous how good I got at videography through him just training me. And I look back at that, I'm like, man, now I see what we do today. I'm like, a lot of our videography, our photography, how to design websites, all this stuff. A lot of people don't know that I do a lot of it because he gave me an eye for how to do it.
I think you got to tell the whole story. But the question I had is, did you have a sense for God's, like a plan that God had for your life, kind of like a promise or even just an understanding of your future that changed as you were going through this experience? Or is it mostly that you were in ministry, you felt like, okay, this is what I feel God's pleasure, I'm doing what God's calling me to do, and therefore you were going in that direction? Did it start there, or did it start when you were much younger?
I think it's a good question. I think that I think when I was younger, I don't know. Now that I look back, I realize that where I always felt like God was going to do significant things through my life, specifically for my generation, was I don't know, this, like, I've always felt like when I was like in a quiet place in nature or outside, sometimes it would just be, when I was younger, it was just my backyard. Or when I went to college, it was like on the roof of this big building overlooking the city. And then now it's like just when I drive through the city, downtown, I always felt like God pressing big prayers for my city on me. And there's times, I think this, like when you there's times when you pray for something and you're like, man, I really hope, God, would you do this? And then there's times when you pray and you feel like God's saying, I am going to do that. And it's kind of scary when you're like, oh, dang, like you are. Not like immediately, but like, I'm kind of scared that you're answering this because I know I should want this, but actually I'm nervous. And so I've always kind of had that feeling when praying for my generation. And even lately, it's kind of shifted towards, it's always gotten bigger. It used to just be for my neighborhood, if you will. Then it got for my city. And lately it's kind of been for the nation. Like as God's kind of expanded my reach to really young, high caliber leaders across the nation and even a little bit across the world. It's praying big prayers of like, God, could I be useful and helpful to help turn things around, at least in the next generation in our country.
Yes. And a lot of times when it gets hard, when the journey gets difficult, it's easy for, I don't know about if it happens to you, but I know it happens to me. And actually, not only do I do it, but people sometimes do it to me. It's like, well, did you actually hear from God? Was that really God? And I sometimes have that sort of thought in my mind that maybe I misheard God. Maybe I made this up, or maybe this is my ambition, or this is my desires, but it's, you know, is it really God guiding me because it feels so hard? There's so many obstacles and it seems to take so long. Do you ever go through those thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I do think there are times that I have honestly done things that have God's name around it, but maybe aren't my things or his plan. I've learned over my life, and I say this often to young leaders, because with the rise of comparison and of course social media can accelerate and amplify how much comparison there can be. It often can make us make young people want to go and do things that maybe it's one, just not their time to do, or maybe never something they're supposed to do. Like when I'm in a friend group that many of us have written books, or many of us travel and speak, and so we see a lot of others that are like, hey, how do I write a book? Or it's like, well, you write a book because you want to help these people. It's not you write a book because other people you know that your age have written a book and this has helped them. And so all that to say is often I give advice of, because through experience, I found that the scariest and most exhausting place you can be is when you bust down a door, even if it's for God's glory or God's name, but it's not like a door he wants you to walk through. And you like just forced your way and you found a way to pick the lock, bust the door open. And now you see what's on the other side, and it's a lot of work. It's very big deal. Like it's just a very big mountain that has to be climbed. And if God's called you to do it, he'll provide you a way there. But if you busted it open and he's like, well, you're on your own, you got to do it. Then the scariest place to be, the most exhausting place to be is on the other side of that door. You busted open and now you're forced to beg God, hey, will you please bless what's on the other side? Even though you haven't called me to be here ever, or at least not yet. The best place to be it's still scary, is God busts down a door and said, I know you're nervous or you don't think you're ready, but I think you are ready. And then you keep going nervously, reluctantly, but you're like, okay, I'm going to be obedient, even though I don't feel qualified, equipped, ready. I'm going to keep taking steps so that then when it is really hard and it feels like an insurmountable mountain that you can't get up, then I always love being able to say, God, I never even wanted to do this. You're the one who forced me through this door. You're the one who told me to do this. And so you're the one that needs to fix this. Like I can't, and I don't have what it takes to do this. And then I've always seen God come through, but it is exhausting to beg him to bless things that we started and he didn't.
You know, I started running, and when I did, I talked to some people who ran marathons. At the time that I started running, I actually signed up with a friend to run a 5K, and I never even practiced, and it took me an hour and 20 minutes. I almost died. So then I thought, I better start talking to people who run marathons and see what it's like. And because I thought it'd be cool to run a marathon. I was in my 30s, and I thought that would be kind of a good thing on my life to do. But when they talk to me about running the marathons, they talk to me about that point in the marathon where you want to quit, when your whole body just wants to quit. And I remember thinking, maybe I never want to run a marathon. So in the context of what we're talking about, so often people don't want to hear that it's hard, right? They want the Moses story, but not the Moses journey. They want the Joseph's authority without having to deal with the jail and all the rejection and being sold out.
Yeah.
But But at the same time, you know, this just seems not how God works. He's constantly putting us through these processes. But how do we not discourage the person who's at the beginning of the journey and feels like, that seems impossible. Why do I want to do that? Or how do we encourage the person that's been on a journey for a long time and it's been hard and they're getting tired, and you want to break through that wall? You have some thoughts on that?
My thoughts on it, I mean, when I hear like the Moses story without the Moses journey, or Joseph's authority without like the jail time, I guess, is I think every person goes through at least a day, if not a season, of trying to be something that they're not, to be accepted or included in a group that they think they want to be accepted or included in. And that kind of prolongs the journey. And I don't know, I do think American Christianity, or like the American dream and Christianity, are sometimes maybe a little too mixed, where we feel like the American dream, like, I don't know, God becomes like a means to an end, or like he's a stepping stone to get, like he's designed for us to, just be, even like this whole idea of praying a hedge of protection around our lives, and like that he's here for our safety. It's a very strange thing when we are so convinced that God is just trying to keep us safe and content and happy and all that, when all of his disciples that he lived with and breathed with died for him. Like, it's just hard how that doesn't like click. Like Paul died, like these guys, many tortured to death. And so now, luckily, I don't think it's to that degree today, but to think that we would live a life without those difficult times is not realistic. What I've tried to have a more positive note on is thinking, I don't know, I get asked a lot, like, how did you end up here? And I actually think I love being able to say, I asked that question, how did I end up here? Like that is, I often think, man, if you're not often in rooms where you're thinking, how did I end up here? Then you're just like, you're not doing it right. You should feel that way. And the reason is, like, God always asks us to do very unique things that don't make sense. And the big thing why I don't really support this idea of like a comfortable Christianity is because I have not found one story in the Bible, not even one, where God shows up and he tells the person, hey, I just wanted to check in and tell you you're doing a great job, and stay the same, exactly where you're going. Every time God enters anyone's life, because that's the funny thing, is like we're begging for God's presence, but anytime God shows up, he always alters their life. Like even, if it's like Moses, here, I actually want you to go do this. Abraham, I want you to move here. Like anyone, I want you to go do something. And I'm not even going to tell you how to get there. Just trust me day by day. The one guy who was actually doing a really, really good job, and you would think, okay, God could show up and say, hey, just keep doing what you're doing. He literally said, oh, have you considered Job? He's one of my best guys. Like, and even him, he shows up. It's like, you kind of don't want God to show up if you want a comfortable, safe, consistent life. And so it's just kind of part of the program. Is I remember hearing Erwin McManus say this once. He said the scariest place to ever be is outside of God's will. He said, the scariest place to be is outside of God's will. And he said, but the second scariest place to be is inside God's will. And so it's not like there's much difference. It's just, at least when you're inside God's will, you know he's with you. But you don't want to be in this like safe, mundane, I would say lukewarm place. And sometimes I think we settle for lukewarm Christianity. And I actually think that's what God like desires for our life.
Yeah, so good. You know, Grant, because I'm a believer later in life, I became a believer at 40. I got very deep in trying to understand like how to live by God's will versus my will, and read lots and lots of books on this subject, and was frustrated for various reasons. One of them is that individualistic thinking that God has that plan for me, and maybe I'll miss it, or I won't do it quite right. And if it's difficult, is it because he's redirecting me, or because I redirected myself? And one of the things I noticed is a lot of the books were written like in the 1980s. I actually did a chart of all the books that I pulled out, and there was an actual pattern of when this topic became very, very popular and who the authors were, where they live. And it was somewhere in between the 80s and the early 2000s where the big bulk of those books were written. And I don't know, maybe the ultimate of our individualistic thinking in this topic of God's will. I'm curious about, you in your book, you talk about it. You clearly just talked about it now. How the next generation thinks about this topic, especially right now with all that's going on. How do we process, like you say, being in God's will or being outside of God's will? Are we using different language? In your book, you talked about purpose, or, you call it the passion generation, the desire to be mission driven. Those are different words, I think, for the same thing. Anyway, I know it's a humongous topic to touch on, but I think it goes with this idea of God's plans are not like our plans.
I think that when I think about finding purpose and finding passion, I think a lot of young people actually don't know what their passion or their purpose is. And I actually think that one of the things I'm disappointed with, or I will not do as a parent, I'm shocked that this is so normal, is a lot of kids go to college thinking college is going to tell them what their purpose is. And I, as a parent, I'm going to tell my kid, like, I'm not spending thousands of dollars so you can maybe find out what your purpose is. College is supposed to be where you know what you want to do, and then you're going to college so you can learn how to better do that. Well, now a lot of kids don't see college as a means to a job. They see it as an experience where they get to, like, find themselves and hopefully get a job. But a lot of kids don't even get a job in remotely close to the major that they're in. And so I think the core of the problem, as Christians especially, is when you look at 1 Timothy 4:12, it actually says that it says, "Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set the believers an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity." And then it says, and then devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, teaching, and exhortation. And the big verse that stuck out to me is it says, "Immerse yourself in your calling." So it's saying, like, just dive all into your calling. And it says, "which was given to you by the prophecy and the counsel of elders." And I remember actually the first time I ever spoke on Next Generation was that Movement Day conference. And I honestly don't share this often, but I was actually when I spoke on the Next Generation, I was going to go in and just try to kind of diss on the older generation, because I was so tired. I was 24 at the time. I was so tired of everyone bringing up participation trophies, and we're all like non-committal and lazy and all these stereotypes about young people. But God really convicted me that I shouldn't go in and just, like, I felt like I was going to defend my generation, but he's like, you're just going to come off very prideful and you're going to feed the stereotype.
Yeah.
And so I felt convicted that I should go in humble. And so when I was looking for a verse to speak on, like the whole "do not let anyone look down on you because you're young," part of the conviction came from, I never realized that wasn't a comma. I mean, it wasn't a period there. It was a comma. It was like the verse goes on, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set the believers an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity." And seeing that this isn't a verse to older people not to look down on us. It's actually a verse for young people to live a life that exemplifies these types of values. And so what really, really stood out, though, was the 2 verses down, how it brings up, "Immerse yourself in your calling." And I was just thinking about all the young people that are trying to figure out their calling, and for it to say and associate our calling with "which was given to you by the counsel and the prophecy of elders." And it made me think about, like, who are older people that maybe prophesied over my life. And there were several I could think of older people that believed in my gifting, spoke into my gifting, said, "Hey, I think you have a calling towards this." And I think a lot of younger people don't have someone who's done that for them, that is, like, put their hand on their shoulder and said, "Hey, I really see a gift in you," whether it's in your personality, whether it's in the way you interact with people, whether it's in a legitimate, like, skill set that you may have, and saying, "I think you should pursue something in that gifting." But as I read that verse, I could think of several people. Some of them were strangers, and some of them were people close to me that kind of a lot of the things I do today, people saw in me when I was 16 years old. And it really hit me. And I don't think also people realize, in Timothy, when he's talking about fan into flame the gift you have, right after that, it says, "Fan into flame the gift you have, which was given to you by the prophecy and the counsel of your grandmother, Lois." And saying, like, your grandma noticed these gifts, continue to fan into flame those gifts. And so I don't think it's impossible for young people to find their passion or their purpose or their calling without older generations. I don't think it's impossible. I just think it's encouraged that young people spend time with older generations, and older generations are intentional with younger generations to identify their gifting. Because if we don't, then yeah, I think, which we are in this situation today, a lot of young people, which the enemy loves, have all this pent up passion and they're dying to be a part of a cause and they want to do something that's important, but they don't know what that is. And that actually can lead, I think, to a lot of depression and sadness, and comparison, because you have this thing in you, but you don't have any outlet for it. You can almost feel betrayed by God for Christian, because you feel like, God, why do I'm dying to be a part of something. And I think, I wish that more older leaders could like say these 4 simple letters of I see in you, just I see this in you, because it does a huge amount of, it does a huge amount of shifts in someone's perspective on themselves when they see others they respect, see things in them.
That is so, so important, because I know my peers, some of the things that I hear them say is like, well, I don't know how to communicate. I don't understand the way they think, or, the next generation thinks, or the kind of challenges that they have. I have many peers who don't even see themselves as mentors. Let me just speak from my personal experience, that you go about life feeling like you're young and you're growing, and then somehow, somewhere, people start calling you ma'am or sir, and all of a sudden people are coming to you asking for advice, which you're always looking. There is some shift somewhere that happens, and it happens before you even know it. And at first you fight it. It's kind of like our generation. First you fight it. And then you become insecure about it. So I know a lot of people who are like, well, I wouldn't know how to walk with a person of the next generation. How do I, especially if they're, if they don't have a good relationship with their kids or don't have children, they may not even know how to do that. So I love how you make it very simple. I see this in you, like just even calling out what's already visible. I always tell my friends, like, this is how you start. You just hang out with them, just have some coffee, let them talk, listen to what they have to say, and just begin that dialogue. Anything else you would suggest to people in my generation who need to step in and, like you say, help create space and platform for you guys to move forward?
Yeah. Well, and I'm not a fan of, I think sometimes what I share, maybe older leaders can think that I want them to baby the next generation. And I always say that I think young people were coddled by their parents, and then they are now criticized by their bosses. And somewhere in the middle, instead of being coddled or criticized, they just need to be coached. And when I say that, more advice I would get is, you're not babying them by seeing things in them. But the more you see good in them, the more you have the right to challenge them. And there's a way that a coach criticizes, and at a way that like a distant boss criticizes. Like a boss says, hey, do this, do that. But a coach is like, hey, I want you to be better, but I'm still on your team. Like when you lose, I lose. And what I love about a boss is trying to make the young person better, and the boss can't do any of the work for them. They can't baby them. It's not like he can say, oh, you know what, I'll put on the helmet and I'll go in for you. Or if you don't know how to kick the ball like this, then I'll kick it. Or I'll whatever the sport is, he has to train them to be the very best version of themselves so that they all can win. And he is going to push them, and but he's on their team. And again, when they lose, he loses as well. So it's you just feel it different. You communicate it differently. One thing I would say is, if you look at the way Jesus approached people and the way we approach, especially the next generation, when you look at how the world talks about young people, you look at the way the church talks about young people, it's not that different. It's mostly negative. All the stereotypes, they're non-committal, they're lazy, they're all these bad, entitled, whatever. Although some of those may be true, they're stereotypes for a reason. I would just be very careful if you want to go the Jesus way of, the more you start with those stereotypes, you're just losing a lot of trust. But what Jesus did is, Jesus had this ability to, or God, honestly, is God had an ability in Old Testament and New Testament to find people that lived one way, and he would like give them a new name. He didn't criticize them. He calls Peter Rock, even though this is a guy who would later abandon him, and is doing some really dumb stuff anyway before that. And he calls him Rock. He gives them like a good name. He gives a lot in the Old Testament. How many times does he give them a new name? And so there's just something about, I have a certain guy. I wouldn't say I'd say he's a mentor. He's not someone who disciples me, but every time I know if he called me right now, the first thing he would say is like, or if I called him and needed advice, the first thing he'd say is like, hey, what's up, rock star? Like he always calls me that. Like he thinks he's like, you're a rock star in your generation. You're going to change your generation. Like he's always saying like, you're the future, you're the hope of this generation. But he always calls me rock star. And I don't know, I've never grown up my life thinking I want to be called rock star, but I do like when he calls me that. I like feel like even if I have been playing video games all day, I've been eating junk food and I haven't worked out in weeks, I hear rock star, I'm like, you know what? I need to live up to what this guy thinks I can be. And so it makes you want to live up to something rather than if you constantly are giving them poor names and tearing them down and not building them up, then eventually, this is human nature, is people are like, you know what, if this is what you think of me anyway, I might as well just live into it because I'm not that, but you think I am and you're saying I am and you repeat it over and over again, that I don't even care about trying to prove you wrong anymore. I'm just going to either cut you off or just give up.
Yeah, so good. And wouldn't you say because of the comparison trap that the comparison trap, the criticism that so often is just easy out there right now for the young generation, that listening to God's promises or trying to follow God's lead or God's plan becomes harder because you're afraid. You don't have the confidence. I think when your friend calls you rock star, what he's saying is, I see God working in your life and doing something powerful in your life and with your life, with your willingness to be open to him. And so that's how God sees you. There's a beautiful picture of him kind of modeling for you, I think, the way God sees us. And to me, to be able to encourage someone, I know when I was young, I remember an attorney that I worked for said, the next job, because I was changing jobs, he goes, you're going to take over within a year. You're going to be the boss within a year. And I was like, that's a challenge. I'm going for it. And I was like, I know nothing about what I'm about to do, but I'm going to go try to take over this place in a year. Just speaking into someone's future is so powerful. Absolutely. Yeah. But not blowing smoke, right? You have to really look at the person and try to see where God is working in their lives, and let the Spirit to guide you as to how to encourage someone else in those moments. But you have to spend time with each other so you can really know, like, how is God speaking to that person? Know that person well enough to speak into their lives. If you're criticizing, you're not going to spend time. Right? You're not going to give someone time who's criticizing you or putting you down.
So I'm going to ask you a question real quick, if that's okay.
Okay.
I know that we've talked about this, as I told you, when I saw in your bio that you had the phrase Millennial Advocate, that to me, I was just like, that's awesome. I mean, to identify as like, this is a part of my like life mission, is to like help the next generation. What was there a story behind why like it shifted towards, this is something I actually want to like identify as or approach as like something that I'll even be marked by?
Well, two things. Yes. One is that when I was in my early 20s, I felt so discounted. I felt like I had all this energy and all this passion, and there were so many people who just, you're too young, just wait, wait. You're too young. You don't know what you're doing. And that really just ticked me off. So I didn't like that. And I felt like I never want to treat people that are young that way. In fact, I mentor quite a few young people, and they feel the same feelings. And I always tell them, you push through, you deal with your character, you work hard, you do what you got to do. Don't count on them, especially those who are criticizing. That's the wrong voices to listen to. So that's number one. I'm also frustrated with the whole the language towards millennials, because I think to some extent, if it's true that they are spoiled and whatever the language might be, lazy, whatever language people use, we as the prior generation have something to do with that. We parent our children. If my children are behaving spoiled and they're being lazy and they're not having good work ethic or whatever it might be, that's partly my responsibility as a parent and partly my responsibility as a part of the society and the culture. So to stand on a criticizing platform is to say, I had nothing to do with that. You guys sort of were born with this problem. And I feel like that's the wrong approach. Not only is this not even honest, but it's also not encouraging, and it's not building up, and it's actually naive to the challenges that the next generation have, which is very different than what we might have had, which is different than the people before us had. I think it's a common thing for generation after generation to, for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe it's just jealousy that they're young and we're not, I don't know what it is, to put down the next generation instead of to lift them up. So all of that, you can see, I get upset. It's a part of me that gets upset when I see young people put down. I love that you are out there trying to bring together young leaders, help them equip one another, encourage one another to not burn out, because I think one of the challenges of having to go do it on your own because there aren't people that come on alongside you and encourage you is that you will burn out. You can't do it on your own. And so that you're bringing them together is awesome, and that you're bringing people of prior generations to stand with them and help them so they can make it through. It's a marathon. We need to make it through all those miles. And we need people along the side with the water and the whatever, to help us help you make it through. It's so that's reason. Anyway, I just can get going. As you can see.
I love that.
Yeah. So thank you for what you do. How can we pray for you in what you're doing right now? How COVID has probably affected a lot of what you're doing, how God's plan may seem very different for you. How can we be praying for you in this time?
Definitely would be, I think the nature of what we do is so relevant right now, in the sense that I'm half Mexican and then half South African, and I grew up mostly with Black people, and I've just always been in this very multicultural world, and I never realized how much God was going to use that over my life. And actually, I used to really hate that I was different. I always wished I could be like one or the other. And the church I grew up in, I've always kind of been in, and just the church as it kind of is mostly white, and so I always really disliked how I was different, and now I love that I'm different, and I see how God uses it. Similar to like Joseph being in a different culture, and just being like I'm from this culture, but I have authority and influence in this other culture. Or Moses, same thing. Like God has a way of using influence. Or Esther. I mean, he often doesn't give like the king position; he gives the influencer to the king position. And so I feel like I have an influential place, but I'm not one of the group, if you will. And so all that to say is, as we've been for years trying to build racial reconciliation among the next generation, of course, in the last month with everything with George Floyd and Arbery and so many different stories over the last couple of years, I just feel like the world is so hungry for some type of relief or change or shift. I don't think anyone on either side is like, let's just keep doing this for the next 40 years. I think everybody's like, we gotta find a solution and a path towards healing. And so, and I think this next generation so excites me and gives me hope when they can be introduced in deep ways to each other. And so I'm really disappointed that there was so much momentum. I mean, last year we made a major shift towards all this, and it just took off so quickly. And then COVID has really like slowed everything down, because I'm not trying to do online gatherings. Like, that's just not my thing. I want to gather in person. I want to be around a campfire. I want us to stay up till like 2 a.m. Just a whole different type of vibe than what you're going to get over Zoom. And so all that to say, I'm sad that it's kind of been prolonged for a year. However, I know God's working on me a lot personally over this year. And I have a feeling from what I'm hearing, he's doing that with a lot of people. He might be like, I don't care about all the stuff you're doing for me. I want to just get back to me and you. And so he's doing that, and that's going to make a mile of difference over the span of my ministry. But yeah, just my prayer would be that God, there's so many things that he's doing behind the scenes that can't ever take credit for, and I will never realize fully, that really can bring resolve to what's going on today. Because a lot of the young leaders that we have are and can be voices to this very hot topic and big tension in our country right now.
Awesome. Well, Thank you, Grant. Definitely will be praying for you as you listen to God in the season. I think that's a great place to close our time together, this idea of God calling us back to himself, because at the end of the day, that is where we know if we're in God's plan, if we're seeking him first and foremost, right? And so I'll pray for strength and endurance for you, for wisdom as you make these decisions. And just know I'm over here on your cheering squad. We're so excited about what you're doing. Jim and I are just love what you're doing. And I can't wait to hear your podcast and what comes next. And hopefully one day another book and whatever else God has in your future. I know that you're trying to seek him first and foremost. And therefore it's going to be a huge blessing to many. So
thank you, Inez. Hey, have a good day.
Thank you. You too.